Hello and welcome. You're watching The Mint. I'm Andy Hodges and this is ZTM Prime broadcasting to you from our studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. Our main story on The Mint today. According to a World Economic Forum report, small and medium businesses, or SMEs, account for 95% of all registered businesses and contribute about 50% to the total GDP of sub-Saharan countries. The WF notes that entrepreneurs still face significant obstacles to growth and prosperity, which go beyond the traditional barrier of acquiring finance. Addressing their needs and ability to reach their potential is essential to creating a prosperous Africa. Notably, about 40% of SMEs in developing countries grapple with access to finance. In Zimbabwe, the SME sector represents the largest employer, especially of young people. Overall, there are over 60,000 registered SMEs in Zimbabwe, which contribute over 60% of the country's gross domestic product GDP. SMEs operate in diverse sectors such as textiles, agribusiness, mining, information technology, communication and construction. You name it, there's an SME in it. We'll be joined today by Farai Mutambanengwe, he's Executive Officer of the SME Association of Zimbabwe. Don't go away, The Mint. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching The Mint, and this is ZTM Prime. Now, as I said, in Zimbabwe, look at the numbers. SME sector contributes probably the largest employer, especially of young people. 70,000 registered SMEs, if not more, in Zimbabwe. And I'm not even talking here about the unregistered SMEs, because as you know, 80% of our economy is done in the informal sector, and most of that sector are technically SMEs. Now, in Zimbabwe, they contribute over 60% of the country's gross domestic product. SMEs, as I said, operate in diverse sectors. In fact, I said this before the breather, you go to any sector in Zimbabwe, there's an SME in it. Now, I'm joined by Farai Mutambanengwe, Executive Officer of the SME Association of Zimbabwe. Farai, it's great to see you and welcome to The Mint, sir.
Thank you, Andy. Great to see you too.
Now, let's talk about your association, SME Association of Zimbabwe. Just briefly, what exactly is your mandate?
All right, our mission is very straightforward. We say we're there to grow startups, small and medium-sized businesses into large corporations.
All right, wow, that's straightforward and simple. But it's not as easy as it sounds, though, does it? Because
no,
that concept of a mindset of operating a business with 1, 2, 3 people to suddenly operating one with 20, 30, 40, people get scared about that. In fact, they don't sometimes want to take that leap.
True.
You're a man of few words. How do you make them take that leap? I mean, how do you, not make them, I suppose, how do you convince them that, you know what, there is greater business or greater profits, greater ability if you boost or improve your business?
All right, I think it's primarily it's a matter of mindset. I think with all things human, it is about mindset. It's about exposure. It's about our backgrounds, our cultures, and a lot of other factors. But I think the biggest issue is that most people, when they start their businesses, they do not have a vision of actually growing the business to become a large corporation or even a multinational corporation. If you look at people starting businesses in Zimbabwe, their mindset, their approach is very different to someone starting a business in the United States, for example. They already start with a mindset of growing into, a multi-state, if not international business. Whereas most of our people, either they're driven into business primarily for survival purposes, so most of them are actually more of subsistence businesses, or even if they do have some sort of profit motive, once they reach a certain stage, once they're comfortable, once they're earning enough money to buy their Mercedes, build their mansion, they're happy. They don't really want to grow the business.
Isn't that one of the problems, of course, is that the moment that they get to that point where they're comfortable, they're making a bit of money, they're not putting that money back into the business. They're more buying disposables. They're buying houses. They're buying new cars and so forth. And that's an issue because you really need to put money in to grow money.
True. It is a big issue. And like I said, it's because of our background. It's because of our culture. We don't have a culture of people growing businesses. We have a few individuals that do it, but not everyone is looking at them as the role models. Not everyone is saying, I want to be the next Strive Masiwa, or I want to be the next Well,
Me? I'm joking.
there you go.
Now, let's talk about definition of SMEs. What is your definition of an SME? Is it Andy with his one person making his cupboards there on the street corner? What do you define as an SME?
All right, we have an actual formal definition for SMEs, both in our SMEs Act as well as in our SMEs policy. In summary, what I can say is SMEs, which is small and medium-sized business. In fact, we talk about micro, small, and medium-sized businesses. The top end for medium-sized businesses is a business that has turnover of up to about 3 million per annum.
Okay.
Employees up to 75. Total assets up to about $1 million. And this is US dollars that we're talking about. So when you actually look at the spectrum of businesses in Zimbabwe, a lot of them actually fall under the category of SMEs.
That's my point, because the world WF, World Bank is saying 300 people underneath that, 15 million doesn't exceed turnover. I mean, in a way, that's pretty much most business in Zimbabwe, to be fair. I mean, if I was making 50 million US dollars, that's pretty good. I mean, that's a big business in this country.
True.
Yeah. True. Now, tell me about the status. I mean, what if you had to look at the SME sector in Zimbabwe, what would be your frank assessment of it? What would you say? Healthy, strong, struggling? I mean, what would you say as the executive officer?
Look, there are some good stories. I wouldn't totally disparage it. Overall, obviously, like I said, our sector is driven more by survival purposes. It's more subsistence. It's driven by the collapse of the formal sector. So it's not the typical sort of spread of businesses. Definitely there's a lot more on, especially the micro end, people trying to eke a living. Small businesses, somewhat there. Medium-sized, much fewer. And like I said, a lot of them we actually call them large companies, although they're actually SMEs.
SMEs. I mean, look at this though. 2022 FinScope survey indicates that MSMEs contributed 8.6 billion United States dollars to the gross domestic product (GDP) and employed more than 5.9 million people. So over 75% of the total workforce of 7.8 million. I mean, this is not a sector to sneeze at. And I think people have underestimated how important the SME is. Tell me, in your view, how important is the SME category to Zimbabwe's economic advancement, in fact, to Zimbabwe's economy?
Well, it is very important. I think that is an acknowledged fact. I think everyone does recognize the fact that this economy remains standing because of SMEs. So SMEs, I think you alluded earlier on, typically worldwide, SMEs will contribute about 50% of GDP. In Zimbabwe, that percentage is slightly higher, probably 60 plus, mostly because we've lost quite a number of our larger corporates. So most people...
So they fill the gap.
Yes, they fill the gap that is there. So obviously, for the Zimbabwean economy, the SMEs are, they are significant. Much more significant than they would be in other countries.
The one thing I said in my opening is I spoke about dividing SMEs into the formal SMEs and informal SMEs because, of course, as we agree, over 70% of all transactions are being done in the informal sector, and a lot of that is informal SMEs. So the major conundrum, the biggest headache, I suppose, your own organization, I'm assuming, and even to the government, is how do you formalize the informal? I mean, how? I mean, let's look at the bottlenecks. I mean, we're talking here about say, registration fees, we're talking about taxes, we're talking about regulation, paperwork, boards of directors, registration of your company. I mean, how do we formalize the informal and try and bring all of those SMEs into the mainstream economy?
Yeah, I think in Zimbabwe, it's kind of a two-way problem. In most economies, what you find is that you have very small informal sectors and relatively large formal sectors. So in other words, most people are going to be working within a large corporate. They're going to be employed. They'll have a job. Whereas in Zimbabwe, we don't have so many large corporates. We have a lot more of these emerging businesses. And typically when businesses are emerging, they tend to start as informal and maybe formalize along the lines. But also we have this peculiar situation where, the formal rules have become so difficult to abide by that a lot of people, in fact, a lot of what we are actually witnessing is what I call informalization, or what is called informalization. And when we say informalization, we're saying people are actually moving from being formal and becoming informal.
Because it gives them more money in their pocket. Unfortunately, this is the irony of life. If you're informal, you don't pay company, you may not pay to the council, you may not pay taxes, you may hide your money, you may not have to bank and stuff, but suddenly you make a lot more profits, no one catches you. I mean, you're right, this informalization is a worry.
Yes, it is. Well, look, I wouldn't say it's entirely driven by people wanting to pocket more money, but I think it's driven by the complexities of the formal environment. Some of the laws and regulations that we have tend to cripple formal activity. If you look at, for example, the issue of SI 118A of 2022, which enforces the official exchange rate on all businesses. Now, the fact of the matter...
you're not allowed to charge only in US dollars, for example.
Well, yes.
That's another one, yeah. That's another SI, right?
Yes, you're not allowed to charge only in US, but what is more, that is not the problem. The problem is you are forced to use the official exchange rate in your pricing. But we all know the official exchange rate right now, I think it's about 4,800 or 4,700, I think, as of the last auction. But when we go to the market, the exchange rate there is about 6,800 and so on. So obviously that then creates problems with formality.
So the arbitrage opportunity that people are making lots of money actually is the reverse for SMEs who lose money if they become model citizens. They'll actually lose money because that isn't the way the market is operating on the ground. I think that's the key here, right?
Yes. The problem is anyone loses money. The only people who are able to operate using those, and this is why you find that if you go into formal establishments or formal businesses, your supermarkets and so on, the Zimbabwe dollar prices are extremely high. And if you try to pay in US dollars, it's actually more expensive.
It's more expensive. We did a survey once. We said something like a 10 kg of mealie meal in a formal shop was around $6. Go downtown, $3.50 for the same 10 kg. And of course, that may be one of the attributes, of course, what they call regulatory or governance costs. But it's cheaper as an SME. So, what are you doing? Are you trying to engage with the government, with city councils, with various stakeholders to try and understand or try and unravel this, let's call it a bottleneck, that's what it is?
Yes, I think there has been extensive engagement. It's not a problem that affects just us as SMEs, it's a problem that, in fact, it affects the formal sector a lot more because those that are operating formally are impacted. But you mentioned the issue of licensing. Again, that's a big issue. You find the licensing fees for the local authorities, for example, it's a one-size-fits-all. So it doesn't matter if I'm running a banking hall that's generating millions of US dollars in profit, or I'm running a little corner, not even a shop, but a little space in a corner that's only generating $3,000 a month. Both of us have to pay exactly the same licensing fee. So I think that is obviously, and unfortunately also those fees have now, I think they've now trebled in real terms, in US dollars, over the past 5 years. So all those things are issues which then drive...
Now, for such a sector that makes up huge, I mean 70% of Zimbabwe Revenue Authority database of registered taxpayers, that's SMEs, but they only contribute 20%. These are the numbers we've got in taxes. I mean, that's a worry, isn't it? I mean, this is a huge market, huge money being made, huge money being generated, but taxes-wise, the government is not really making its revenue.
Not really. I wouldn't say it's a worry. I think it's consistent. I'm sure you know Pareto's rule. 20% of the people generate 80% of the income, So it's consistent. If you've got those sort of ratios, you wouldn't expect that SMEs, someone running a small corner shop is going to pay the same taxes.
So I suppose the trick is formalize them more, and then obviously your taxes may go up with a bit of luck.
Yes,
that's the idea behind it.
Yes, I think the approach is always to make it easy for people to be formal, not to insist too much on the licensing fees, but rather generate, and even your tax rates and so on, you want them to be things that encourage people to formalize.
I like that concept. Make access easy and get your money from trading, from the profits they make, from the taxes they make, rather than just sort of, that's the word, charging them out of existence.
Exactly.
Right, then it's time for us to take a breather. And after the break, I continue my conversation with Farai Mutambanengwe. He's Executive Officer of the SME Association of Zimbabwe. Don't go away, the Mint. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Chew On, the show that links people, food and culture whilst giving you a diverse culinary experience.
Pure ingredients, wholesome, vibrant and earthy dishes. When you get all the elements together, it all sings. That's what Zimbabwean food is all about. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chew On.
It is a real puzzle how crystal meth has made its way into communities and continues to ravage the youth. This is where it all begins. Is enough focus being put on mental health?
Welcome back. You're watching The Mint, and this is ZTN Prime. Hello, I'm Andy Hodges. I'm joined again. He's been with me for the first segment by Farai Mutambanengwe. He's Executive Officer of the SME Association of Zimbabwe. Farai, let's talk about one contentious issue, or one issue that obviously could be a hindrance to SME growth, and that's access to finance. Or in fact, finance just by its very nature. And it's key to the SME growth in emerging markets and developing countries. I think the World Bank has proven those studies. So what can we do in Zimbabwe? You know, every year the Minister of Finance announces a budget. He says he's putting some money towards SME financing. I speak to you, I speak to your members. No one has ever seen this money. No one knows where it is. No one knows where it's gone. I speak to the Minister of SMEs, Minister Nyoni. She says, no, the money is there. It's being dispersed. It's very confusing. What is the story? What's the true story? And how can we ensure that finance given to SMEs gets to SMEs?
Well, the story is exactly like you put it. We are told it's there, but we've never seen it. None of our members have seen it. I've never seen it myself. Look, I think it's quite a complex issue. Typically, we've got organizations, for example, like SMEDCO. We've got organizations like Zimbabwe Women's Bank, the Empower Bank for the Youth, and so on. The problem that we always that has always arisen, a lot of the time some of these facilities are announced, but when you go to the banks are still insisting on things like collateral security, which most SMEs will not have. In fact, specifically collateral in the form of title deeds. And it's an issue which we've worked to try and tackle over the years. We've pushed the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. They set up a collateral registry and then they went quiet.
Yeah, I remember, because didn't they say things like you can use assets now, yes, and like your machinery and stuff to securitize the loan? So that was what was announced with a lot of fanfare. Are you saying that even hasn't got off the ground?
No, it never took off. And what we've seen discussing with the financial institutions, they still default to their position of wanting title deeds as collateral. So yeah, despite a lot of efforts in the space, we've.
So are we saying then, let's being blunt now, are we saying then that access to finance to SMEs, if I can call it this, for want of a better word, is a pipe dream at the moment in Zimbabwe?
Unfortunately, we would have to say that.
Because that takes me to my next question, because, you know, the government talks about how important SMEs are to the economy, how important SMEs are to economic growth. But I don't get this impression, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe you can correct me. What is your view? Are they creating a conducive environment for SMEs to prosper?
Well, again, obviously, the environment is not, like I said before, even the formal businesses are struggling in the environment. Let alone SMEs. So you find the environment is not very conducive. The support measures that are supposed to be there, we don't really, they never really filter down in a way that we can actually see. So yeah, at the moment, I think the SMEs are
Tough
on their own.
headwinds, but you're keeping on fighting. I can see that. I've known you for a while. Your mandate and mission hasn't changed, which is fantastic. We'll keep it up. Let's talk about capacity building, because that's also key in the growth of SMEs. I mean, the lack of industry experience and knowledge has seen the downfall, I suppose, of most SME ventures. Sometimes they call it herd mentality, where an SME sees an opportunity that everyone is in. They jump into that now because they can make money with it quickly. I think a good example is winter clothing that people are bringing in now because it's so cold, and that only lasts for like the next 2 or so months. So what about capacity building of SMEs or small business owners so that they have a sustainable, workable, long-term business model that actually can fulfill their objectives, not just now, quick money, but actually have a sustainable business?
Yeah, I think there's been low uptake, if I can put it that way. There's been low uptake when it comes to capacity building programs. We run those kind of programs. I think there are quite a number of other programs. Low uptake because primarily I think there's this kind of expectation that if I go for a training program, I should then get funded thereafter, which is
funding.
not
It's terrible, isn't it?
Yes, which is not really. It's not necessarily the case that. Because capacity building is just to be able to enhance your capacity to run your business. And a lot of the times, a lot of the problems do not need money to solve them. They need skill, they need capacity, they need maybe exposure and things like that. And that's what you get from capacity building programs.
I mean, I cannot agree with you more. I mean, when you're looking at a business, okay, and this is one thing I believe small business owners need to be worried about. You can't do everything. Yeah, let's be clear here. You may have a great idea, you may be a great cabinet maker, but you can't market. You don't know social media. You don't know how to run your finances and your books. You may even be reckless in how you spend money. All right, so you do need capacity building to learn those type of skills.
Yes, because you need to learn how to manage. You need to know how to have or set up structures, put in place the right people, put in place the right systems, and so on. No one is born knowing how to run a business, so you need to be trained. And even if, because a lot of the times we get people, for example, I may have been working somewhere, I was a managing director, and I think I can set up a business and run it. It's not necessarily the case.
Doesn't work that way.
The skill set is different.
You're right. I mean, that's what I can always say. Not everyone's an entrepreneur. Some of us work for people, others are happy to be at the leading front and succeed. Some actually can't do that. That takes me to the next question, which is interesting. The concept of SMEs embracing technology. I mean, there's no doubt that we are now in the technological age. I mean, everything is technical. I mean, I even speak to you on WhatsApp. We Zoom each other. There's also programs for me to do my finances. There's even marketing programs. I'm sure there's some you can get online. Yes. How have you, or are you as an association trying to get SMEs to embrace technology, to start using newer and new technologies to improve their bottom line, to improve their businesses?
Yes, definitely. I think, in fact, our theme this year is about embracing technology or embracing digital transformation. Because digital transformation is what will enable you to increase your capacity. I remember one of the speakers that we had sometime said, how do you make your business serve 50,000 people in exactly the same way as it can serve 5 people? And the only way you can do that is through digital transformation, through technology, because you're never going to be able to have enough people to service those sort of volume. So technology, digital transformation, those are definitely things that almost every business.
What sort of, if I can call it, entry-level technology are we talking about here? Because obviously there's a Rolls-Royce of technology, which you don't really need an SME. What do you think you would recommend to SMEs in terms of the entry-level technology that they need to sort of get in their business to improve it?
Well, I think the basics are obviously having things like a proper email address, and I mean having your own domain, having your own website, having a location online, having a digital presence, in other words, having Facebook pages, social media pages, registering on platforms like Google My Business and so on. So those are entry-level sort of digital transformation moves. And then it obviously gets more advanced in terms of the technology you use within your business, your accounting systems, your human resource management system, your production systems, all the way through to ERPs or enterprise resource planning systems. So it's a graduation.
And
it's
also
a scale.
having the skills, or at least maybe a consulting company or one that runs a lot of SMEs to do it for you. As we said earlier, it's important that you know that some things you can't do. I think once you accept that, you actually, in fact, in a way, that recognition is one step to success.
True.
Yeah.
True. It's one of the skills we need, actually.
It's one of the skills.
Yes.
I like
we
that.
need to know that. But we are saying that it's a spectrum, because there are different things that need to be done at different stages of growth of the business.
Now, I want to talk about, before I talk about workspaces, which is critical, I want to talk about your views about the parallel market. You did mention, of course, that it's what SMEs out there on the ground are transacting in. They're using the parallel market rate. The official rate is great, and we all know it. It's printed in the papers, and it's happening in banks. But on the street, that isn't the rate people are using. So I suppose, but that isn't good for SMEs. I mean, surely you don't like that. Would you, so first comment on that, but more importantly, what would you recommend needs to be done from an SME viewpoint to eliminate this parallel market rate so we have certainty, we have planning, we have certainty of planning, we know what we can budget for? Well, what are your views?
Well, I think in Zimbabwe, what we are calling the parallel market is actually, I would say, the broad market. Unfortunately, because the official market is very limited, and it's limited to a very few number of players. If you look at the auction at the moment, there's only about $500,000 that's coming through every week on the auction. But let's look around how many transactions. There's hundreds of millions of dollars of transactions that are happening in the same time. So what it means is the official market is restricted to a very few players. I think the last auction, it was 15 bids. And that is the problem. There's restricted access to the formal market. So people have to rely on the alternative. So I think the authorities have to open up or embrace the whole market into the formal. Because formalization at the end of the day is, especially in our case, it's just about being able to, if I cannot go into my bank, because we all know fuel is purchased in US dollars, but if I have Zimbabwe dollars, I need fuel, I can't go to my bank and say I need US dollars to buy my fuel. What am I going to do? I'm going to use the alternative market. And this is why I said it's actually the market. In other countries, the parallel market is only used by illegal traders, people trying to launder money. Because everything else is catered for in the formal market. In our case, the formal market is hardly catering for anything. Most people have to rely, and it's by force, it's not by choice. No one wants to trade on the parallel market. I would rather get the rate of 4.7 than have to go and buy at 6.8. But I can't. That is the fact of the matter.
So basically access, equal access, improving the pot, even willing buyer, willing seller, involving SMEs rather than, as you said, just dealing with a large corporate. Because it's easier for a bank to sell to a large corporate than sell to a little guy for 5,000, 10,000. But sometimes that's all an SME needs to survive.
Not even 5,000, because we're talking of $500. We're talking of, and this is, again, this is the problem with the auction, because it starts at a minimum of 1,500. I'll tell you, in this environment, very few people have 1,500 to actually be able, or the equivalent of 1,500 to actually be able to participate on the auction.
Right, now I want to move on to this because it's important. I've got about a minute or so left. It's about workspaces because, you go around the capital city or even Bulawayo, or in fact most cities in Zimbabwe, and you see incredible SMEs, incredible furniture. In fact, some large operations buy from the SMEs and they put them in their formal workshops. I mean, the good example is the cabinet manufacturing place where all the cabinet makers are, is at Area 8. So the question is that how can workspaces in the right area, right, at the right prices, do you believe they're necessary? Do you believe that more needs to be done to build them? Do you believe they will help SMEs grow?
Definitely more needs to be done. I think some organizations have moved into that space. You look at the CBD, it's become SME. A lot of the old department stores are now malls, but we need more in terms of the industrial type of space. I think efforts are there, but there's definitely a lot more.
I mean,
and I think it's an opportunity.
Let's be honest, Bulawayo City has put in, I think they're working with Old Mutual to build some workspaces for SMEs and so forth. I mean, they're trying, but it's not enough, is it?
No, it's not. And I think it's an opportunity. I think there's a lot of money to be made from creating the right sort of workspaces to enable SMEs to operate.
Faraimota Manengwe, Executive Officer of the SME Association of Zimbabwe. Sir, thank you so much for appearing on The Mint.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today's episode of The Mint. Of course, you can join us 2 p.m. Central African time, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday and Friday for The Mint. And of course, Wednesday, Beat the Market. Don't miss our programming right here on ZTM Prime. I, of course, will see you Monday morning, bright and early, 6 a.m. Whoa, 6 to 8 a.m. for the only show you should wake up for, and that is Morning Rush. I'm Andy Hodges. Have a great weekend. Goodbye, and please, you all be safe.